All right, all right. Here we are. We're going live. What is going on, my friends? We've got John Hammond. We've got Matt Lee. What's up, my friends? How you guys doing today?
Awesome.
Hey, man. I'm doing well. How are you?
I cannot complain. It's Friday, but it doesn't feel like Friday. It kind of feels a little bit like a Monday to me. It's been nonstop. Has it been that way for you guys?
Oh,
yeah. Yeah. It's been a crazy week for sure.
Right on, man. It is. This is great. So we are going to be diving deep into the Whitehouse National Cybersecurity Strategy. It's really great seeing everyone online checking in. Make sure you guys say, hey, shout out to us. Let us know where you're connecting in from. Really good to see you guys. Maybe just super quick start so we all kind of know each other and who we are. John, you want to say hi first? Who you are, what the heck you do?
Sure thing. All right. Well, hey, hi, hello. Thanks so much for letting me come crash the party for a little bit. I'm John. I work over at Huntress for my day job as a security researcher there, just a fellow geek and nerd. Hey, fella on the keyboard. And hey, over on the side, I do some silly YouTube stuff trying to just spread cybersecurity education and training and awareness. So I don't know, try to be part of the party and in with the scene.
Right on, my friend. So good to have you. Matt Lee, what's up?
What's up, brother? Matt Lee. I'm a recovering MSP owner and technician. I sat in every seat there, and now I'm blessed enough to work for PAX 8, who allows me to educate the masses as well as myself on a constant basis. So pretty stoked to be here. Thank you for letting me crash the party to Empath Cyber.
Heck yeah, man. Really glad you're here. You got Wes Spencer here as well. I'm founder of Empath Cyber, helping MSPs and folks just grow in their security journey. And it's really great to be with you. So we've known that, maybe we'll just kick off this way. We've known that the National Cybersecurity Strategy was coming forth. There was a lot of rumors, a lot of discussion about this about to happen. Jen Easterly, even a few days ago when she was at Carnegie Mellon, even let drop some like pieces out of what the strategy was going to look like. That spun up a whole bunch of discussion around software liability, which we're going to get to. But Matt, I'll just start with you on this. When we look at the National Cybersecurity Strategy, we knew it was coming. Give me your first reactions and thoughts when you first came across it.
You know, I don't want to be that big cheerleader on this, but I do think it's quite a well-formed stratagem of things that there's a lot of details to work out. There's a lot of things to figure out, but I think it pretty well addresses most of the things that I think are broken in our industry. And a lot of the things that, if we look at back in past, right, automobiles went through the same thing. It was a similar thing. Technology comes first, safety, security, and protectability and defensibility comes second. So I'm stoked about it, but I'd be very interested to see how we can guide what comes out of this over the next couple of years.
And John, same question over to you. I mean, we knew that this was forthcoming. We knew it was imminent. So you open that thing up. Give me your first reactions as you pulled it up.
Okay. So how's my audio, first of all, by the way?
Great.
Am I looking good? Okay. So no, hey, I don't know how many folks tuning in have already kind of dug through whatever 40-page PDF this thing really was. So I thought, you know, I'd maybe hit a softball to kind of get the ball rolling, because I know we haven't dug into the meat of it yet. But I see a couple occasional either hot takes or folks laying out their perspective in the Twitterverse and just saying, hey, this is just a PR play. This is just some grandstanding. Right. This is just making it look like we're making the right moves and nothing's going to change. I don't know. I think it's still really early. Obviously, this thing just dropped yesterday. But I do know I was having a conversation with the gentleman the other day who is sort of in that world. Hey, he's over at DHS. And he also is sort of part of the like InfoSec or information security scene, like the fellows that go to a DEF CON or go to a B-Sides or attend some of these events and try to be with it. And he was telling me that, you know, they brought in the Hackers on the Hill crew, the folks that even before ShmooCon or like a cybersecurity event will go visit the White House and Congress and see folks. And they actually asked for like, hey, can you advise us on this? And they had a peer review sort of like twice over, looked this thing through, actually took their suggestions. And that gives me some really good feelings to this. And I am probably more of the optimist and the glass half full here. Like whatever we dive into, whatever we dig into, when we get down to the question of, look, are we making the right steps? Are we doing what we need to do? I don't know yet. Don't have the crystal ball, can't see the future, but I think the fact that we move forward in one direction, whatever direction, is a good thing.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, that's well said. Like everything is iterative in this world, right? Like we just don't do anything in one stop. We just don't hit the grand slam walking right up to the plate. It's all the work that it takes to finally get to that stage. And that's where cyber is. It's still such a young field, and really well said from both of you. I did want to give you all a peek at this. If you haven't seen the National Cybersecurity Strategy, this is it right here. Very easy to find. It's right from the White House's website. So you can bring this up. We're not going to go over the document itself directly as far as like what we're showing on the screen, other than just right now. But it does walk through 5 major pillars. Today, we're going to talk about 3 of those pillars. The 4th and the 5th, we just don't have enough hours in the day for. So we're not going to do that. But we are going to cover the first 3 that go in depth. And we're going to just kind of unpack some of the big implications. It's impossible. Let me just scroll. Let me show you. Look how many words there are, right? So we can't go through every little piece. And you may have a lot of questions about specifics that, we may not be able to fully answer directly. But what we are going to do is we want to pull this out for MSPs and small business in particular, who have been caught in the crosshairs over everything that's been happening over the past 3, 4, 5 years. And Matt, you, John, myself, we've been in that fight with our small business friends. We've seen the impact of them. I call it sort of head in hands. My business is over. I've just been hit
Yeah.
by the huge ransomware thing, and I'm getting 60 calls coming in a minute from really angry clients. And I got lawsuits coming in, and I can't afford a ransom. And I'm literally scrounging money up from everywhere. We're sitting here wondering, hello, when is the federal government going to wake up and take some amount of attention to us and our plight and the plight of the MSPs? And I just think, going back, John, to what you said at your last comment, this is the next step in that journey. Don't you think so? It's not perfect. We're not saying that, but I think it is the next step. John, what are your thoughts there?
I'd agree. Um, it's hard to know. And again, just kind of what I was mentioning. Like, look, it's very, very early. I don't have the crystal ball, not Nostradamus. But whenever we either crank out a new acronym for some new task force, for some new interagency collaboration, I still think that's a good thing, truthfully.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well said. All right, so let's jump in. First thing they started with was trends. What are we seeing is what's happening in the world around us. I'm not sure that any of us were like shocked by some of the trends, but I pulled out a few snippets. Matt, I'm going to come to you first. Looking at some of the trends, looking at like this quote here, that we're not going to just read the
Yeah.
quote. You can read it on yourself. Anything that stuck out to you in particular here?
Boy, you get me going on this one, right? So this triggers me a little bit. I've had this concept called the middle theory, and it's really just a restating of capitalism to say, if you make a product way more sophisticated than the consuming entity, they're not going to pay you more for it or reward you for it. And so for the most part, our software world has been built on buy software, somehow cobble it together to work with that software, move on to next software. And the sprints and the things that are getting built are saying, next feature, next thing, let's add on. Every roll up has been a roll up just for profitability and EBITDA, right? And so you see this world where, the collective insecurity they talk about, adding stuff on top of another stuff, plus then whatever we add on top of it and whatever we bolt into the next product or service, that's a real big challenge. And so I like that we speak towards that, is that we are getting more complex, but at the same time, we're actually getting simpler. We're getting more and more tied to one identity plane, tied to some SaaS extensibility reliant upon their own security protocols. And so from my point of this is really just saying, we've adopted the crud out of the tech. We've put the steam boiler in the baby's room, right? And then eventually it blows up and we have real problems. And so I feel like those are kind of the things we're going through in that our own industrial revolution on this, technology revolution, as we call it today. So yeah, pulling my string on that. But I do think we're speaking towards more and more and more adoption of tech that has more and more fundamental challenges that aren't being solved, as well as adopting things that should protect you are also not happening from a hygienic perspective. So I'll shut up now because we only have like 50 some odd minutes. So
No, it's all good. So John, talk to me about some of these trends, right? There's this whole idea here of like, we've been stacking technology and innovation on top, and we have tech debt below it. That tech debt are things that have been around forever, for years. We haven't really addressed some of that. We even have underlying technology like IPv4 is an example, not to get too technical here, that still is the backbone of everything we do, that was not designed with security in mind. And so we have tech debt, and that's one of the big pieces of the emerging trend that sticks out. Anything in particular there that kind of went through your brain as you're reading through the trends at the beginning?
Nothing extremely novel, I'll admit, but it is, if I may, just a plus one or a foot stomp or another extra emphasis, because I love that you have it in red here. The brittle systems, and brittle is the word that always sticks out in my mind, like it's fragile, like there's a piece already falling off. Because I think of couple nerds maybe in the room of the Linux world, we saw bugs in like the sudo command, some of the core native to this operating system, or print nightmare for the Windows folks. Again, not wanting to get too nerdy, but those are things that like, hey, they've always been there, and we're still finding weaknesses or flaws or just mishaps that we've missed and overlooked. They've been sitting around for decades. Uh, so I'm glad that we're putting that out in the open. We need to kind of get that dirty laundry at least on display so we can fix it.
Yeah. Okay, well said. So let's move past some of the trends. And one of the things they did at the very beginning is they called out some of the pernicious, pervasive threat actors that are out there. And the classic three, if you're going to throw a dart on a dartboard, these are the three it's going to hit, right? And I don't know. It looked, I don't think anyone was shocked by this, Matt. Right? When you see People's Republic of China, Russia, DPRK, like, okay, we're like, all right, we get it. There's a whole plethora of others that we could have gotten into as well. But what were your thoughts when they called out these actors?
I mean, I think it's just trying to address the elephant in the room. This is probably more outward facing than it is inward facing to the nation, I would wager, just by a statement perspective. You have two nation state espionage players, and then you have one starving nation state, right, that doesn't mind ransoming for cash. So I think they're just calling it out. I don't think I would put a lot of emphasis on this being all that novel. No, this is well known in our industry.
And John, other than me messing up, the bear should have been on Russia and the panda should have been on China. It's a brilliant move on my part. Anything else stand out to you, John?
No, honestly, I was thinking as I got through this segment of the strategies, like, okay, this is like the boring part. This is the boilerplate that we have to have at the beginning, because I think the administration is addressing, and I appreciate them putting it out in the open. Like, cool, these are the chess pieces on the board, but the more important question that we could go on to answer is, what are the moves that we can make? What everyone already knows this. Let's just get this out in front and let's dive into the real stuff. So I kind of agreed, like, we know the threats are there. At the end of the day, maybe some folks listening in, I don't care who it is. It's just a matter of, it's a threat. So now let's get into the good stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Well said. And maybe the last thing I'll say is if you're sitting here at a larger company and you are kind of you're doing what we call threat modeling and trying to understand who your adversary is, the one thing I will say to this is, when you think about China in particular, they do call out, what is China trying to do? They're trying to grow into an empire. They're like a true cyber empire. And the one thing that did stick out to me a little bit is, the report literally said they're the only country with both the intent to reshape the international order and the economic, diplomatic, military, technological power to do so. So it is, it's like you said, Matt, a spade. We knew that. It's not, it's obvious. It's not a shock, but it is good to see it disclosed from the White House, don't you think?
Yep, 100%. And I do like that they call out the disinformation aspect of this. One of the interesting parts of a binary system, not to get political, is that if you have a binary system where one side is against the other and you drive a wedge between them, they get further and further apart until mitosis happens, right? And so you have this very interesting willingness of these countries to play in our political systems vis-a-vis disinformation campaigns, things like that. So I did like seeing that called out in some of the conversation there.
You got it. And to the question of why does DPRK get a Pegasus? It's actually I can't pronounce it. It's like Kwanlima or something like that. It comes back to like ancient Korean folklore, and that's where the sign came from. So, okay, let's move on a little bit. Let's get into the fourth party that we had. And I almost had this as the fourth, but then I decided, no, let's focus on this one a little bit more. And we should focus because we're talking about specifically, MSPs, small businesses are focused today on unpacking the National Cybersecurity Strategy. So the criminal syndicates themselves, right? We've known these are the problem. Both of you have run up and butted up against them. John, you guys, especially at Huntress, I mean, all the way back from the GanCrab days and quite a bit. So I want you to lead off on this and talk to me about your thoughts and reactions from what the report said around criminal syndicates. Anything that stood out to you in particular?
I want to pull back to go see, hey, can I get a good gem or anything worthwhile for the criminal syndicates? I'm kind of scrolling around, digging through, because in my mind, these are the more sinister threats. I think they're the ones that are going to be most rapidly targeting the small mid-market businesses or managed service providers, just because those don't make news. you know,
Yeah.
hey, you got a high flying, flashy, advanced persistent threat, whatever foreign nation state that we've just alluded to in the previous slide. Those are going to be the big things that get headlines and make everyone talking about it and put them out in the open. Once you've got the small stuff, and not to trivialize, but hey, mom and pop shop, bicycle store down the corner, uh, they can kind of do whatever they want for the cybercrime aspect, and then no one is really any the wiser. Because not everyone is going to be boarding up their windows because it's not going to be some big global story to it. Those are the ones I think absolutely need a little bit more love, and I'm well, not the right word in that
Yeah,
case,
yeah,
but
fair.
more attention in the spotlight. And I'm just grateful that that is included and certainly has its own designated segment.
Yep. And I would add to that, right? The criminal syndicates, it's absolutely the easiest and lowest barrier to entry. It's the rapid growing segment. There's an entire ecosystem built off of that around initial access brokerage, as well as after action, right? All of that has a huge economic drive behind it. And so I think calling this out from a billions, I think that's probably a really short number. And I think calling this out here of them saying, hey, people don't often cooperate with law enforcement. In my particular case, we did not have to disclose. It was prior to egression of data and double extortion methodologies by our evil. But the law enforcement still came to us and said, hey, we found that 7 victims happened within milliseconds, and we think you guys were related. And that answer was, the first time we had to actually deal with it. So I have to imagine that they're getting better data out of the criminal syndicates by monitoring their bragging about ransoms that have been paid than they're actually taking real measurement of impact in the United States. And so I like seeing it called out here.
Well said. Yeah, very well said. And the thing that
I
sticks
get
out
one
to
a day,
me.
Wes.
No, I bet that's not true. Oh, and Diego, I see your comment. Yeah, we can get you the presentation. Absolutely no problem. This will be recorded. It is being recorded, and happy to get you just reach out to one of us and we'll get you a copy of the slides for sure. No problems. The thing that resonated with me well here is I've always felt like if there's one thing that the federal government lacked, it was empathy towards the small business sector. And if for any reason, I would just point out the fact that this kind of goes back to Matt, what you were saying, part and parcel of they just weren't fully aware of just not only the damages because it's smaller amounts and high volume, but also just, I think they've lost touch or have lost touch in the past of like, do you understand when you hit a small business, this is not like Bank of America where like, okay, yeah, that really sucked. And boy, 10 million were back in business. That literally is no dent in their armor. For small business, you've radically changed their life for the
Yep.
worse, right? And so I do love that last quote that I put in red, including disproportionately affecting those without the resources necessary to protect themselves, recover, or seek recourse.
Yep.
And I don't want to take that quote so far as to say, MSPs and small business have no hope and there's nothing they can do, because there is things that they can do. But I do appreciate that reflection. And we see this in other parts of the report that we'll get to, that, the small side needs help. And it's probably
Yep.
incumbent on those that are larger to do more. I kind of liken it to a schoolroom. You got the bully and then you have the really big kid that's the defender that stands up against the bully, for the rest of the kids. Like, maybe that's not a good analogy, but that really rung to me. I'm like, I'm so glad to at least see the beginnings of this being expressed. John, what do you think?
I agree. And I think that might lead us into a little bit more of the next conversation that I think you were thinking we could have, because we get into, hey, it's almost an insurmountable task for a small spot. Even if we got down to the individual, like, hey, we just got into a person, maybe mom, dad, grandma, I don't know, but they're not the person that will have a Google Authenticator Duo 2-factor authentication setup with a smart password manager that does all the
Right.
cybersecurity hygiene right. Uh, those are, unfortunately, and there are some that, like, these are going to be the people that click on a link in an email or don't run antivirus because it's spyware. I don't want that monitoring what I do on my computer. I
Yep.
think everyone tends to know that a person like that. So I do like that the burden, the responsibility is what we decide to end up shifting or moving in one way or the other. Because I think there are people in our industry, I like to think and hope that, hey, we're a part of that side that says, we want to carry this responsibility and hold this burden for you because we can and we know how, and we will. And we'll do that the right way. Because in some cases, a person, whoever we might point to for that example, might not be able to. So.
Yeah. Well, and part of this, I had a conversation with an executive, and I won't say what company it was with, but they were pointing out to me that only a certain portion of MFA was enabled for small to mid-sized business, right? Like 26%. And they said, how can we educate you? How can we teach them to be better? How can we make this better for you? And my argument back was, why don't you just turn it on for everybody? And the look of shock in her face was, oh, we could never do that. That would cost too much in capital, and it would cost too much pain and friction for the sales process. And I think that's kind of part of what's being exposed here, right? Is that as a consumer, when I go buy a car and I go to the Toyota dealership or I go to the Ferrari dealership, or which I don't have the money for, but I like to drool, or if I go to anywhere else, I have a reasonable expectation of consumer safety. I have a reasonable expectation that it's not just caveat emptor, enjoy this short shotgun kid, right? And so I feel like that's kind of where we're at right now with software is we are handing consumers a loaded shotgun that's short enough they can shoot themselves in the face with, and then going, you really should protect yourself and buy a safety. How about getting something to we don't think safety first, and that changes over time in any technology, right? I mean, get off my pulpit here, but I think the small orgs and small people are left to defend worse disproportionately because it takes a knowledge set to turn things from not secure by default to secure. Anyways, I'll get off that one. But
No, it's fantastic. And to this end, let's bring up a question from the audience from the one and only Eric Bowles. Really good. And by the way, I hate this cutoff thing, so we may have to unshare it to finish reading the quote.
yeah,
They got to fix that. But curious on the panel's thoughts here as I read, it's as if they put the onus on the MSP and not the vendor nor the customer, even if one of those two are the reason for a breach. I think this will push a lot of the smaller one-man shops out of business. I'm going to unshare so I can read the rest of this. The approach here is for these smaller MSPs to establish minimum qualification agreements with their customers in regards to security practices, and opens an opportunity for cyber education for their customers. Any thoughts on that from either of you?
I mean, I think he's pulling a chain that needs to be pulled a little bit. I think there's this concept of, oh, the small guy or gal can't do it. I don't know that that's necessarily true. What I will say is we've seen this motion coming for a long time of MSPs have worked their butt off to be efficient, to be profitable, to have good W-2 multipliers, to have the right customer service. They haven't flexed this muscle to go and solve some of these security, have policy, drive some of these things that need to happen. And so they're going to get better. Is a 5-person shop better and faster potentially than a 1-person shop and what they can do dealing with all the plate spinning? Potentially. I feel like, though, my CPA can be a CPA of one. My attorney can be an attorney of one. There are systems and ecosystems that have been built out to make that functional, to meet the compliances necessary. I think we'll get there too. So I'm being the optimist on this. I think it will change our industry, and I think it will have the effect of you not just being able to put a sticky note on the wall and say I'm an MSP, because you won't last that long, right? But I think somebody said, rising tides rise all boats. I say that all the time. But people forget there's sometimes people chained to the bottom, and sometimes that tide still rises, and that sometimes has to happen in an industry to change it. So there were people that never moved on to making internal combustion engines and still use steam boilers, right? Like there was a whole industry that lost out. So anyways, I digress. Yeah, great question.
It is good thoughts. And on yesterday's live stream, I brought on Brad Gross, who's a cyber attorney. And Brad had some really good thoughts around all of this. And we'll get more into, in a minute, we'll go into the parts of the strategy that talk about liability. And this is a can of worms. And one of the things that he said specifically was, well, this whole idea of due care. How do we establish what due care is? And who's the arbiter of what due care is? Who's the one that comes in and says, well, that should be liable and that should have safe harbor because that company didn't do these things and that company did these things. And so they set the precedent, CISA does, or sorry, the White House does, of there should be some amount of this liability thing. But I guess we'll dive into it a little bit more. But going into Eric's question, this does put MSPs in a bit of a difficult spot because they don't truly really write hardly any of their own software. They're just leveraging a lot of stuff that's third party to them, maybe fourth party to them. And boy, this could potentially.
But they can prove reasonableness, right? And the burden of care today is just reasonableness. It is, can I show to people? And I'll break this down real quick, and then John, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. But right now, my job would be to prove to 12 of my peers that what I did was reasonable. And I like to tell this in hyperbolous fashion by saying, why'd you choose to use SentinelOne? Or why'd you choose Huntress EDR? Man, because it's that new hotness. And that's what everybody's doing right now, bro, is not very defensible. However, I was following CIS Control 10, and it forced me to choose one of the softwares. Here's how I evaluate them. Here's the ones that I chose. Here's the reasons for it. Also, this is the function that it provides and the number of things that it crosses off on 10.1, 10.2, 10. Even if you're not technical and your eyes are rolling back in your head in that juror pool, it's reasonable. It's hard to prove unreasonable. And when you start talking about consuming other people's software, it's about the vetting, and it's about showing your work and how you chose them, and what is your exit strategy if they don't meet a certain requirement, and how do you have conversations to drive them to do the right things. And I believe all that builds reasonableness. And I'm having that show next week with Brad Gross myself on my show, so it's going to be a fun conversation. Anyway, sorry, John, your turn.
John, what do you think? Is that reasonableness? The courts putting in your lawyer hat? Are they going to say, hey, you went down a CIS line journey or CSF or what have you, and that seems to be reasonable? What do you think?
Trying to get back to, I think, maybe the end of the question that was asking, hey, what about the one person shop or the businesses that, hey, there's a sole individual that's keeping this thing afloat? Because I am absolutely understanding and I do agree. Okay, that's a heck of a lot of pressure at this point, now more than ever. I think one of the themes, and I'm going to be riding off, Matt, your coattails a little bit here, because, like, look, if you're doing what you can to keep those tools or vendors or things that you pull off the shelf accountable during that vetting process, and that's something I think we'll even chat about more within the strategy, and also the resources and material that's available and accessible to you, and that's something that people need to know and use. The strategy goes on to list, hey, all these new folks, all these new teams, all these new things that we're trying to build out so that you can have that when something hits the fan. They have a really cool line in there that says a call to one is a call to all. And that, like, hey, there are people on the field here, and this is a team sport. So whether you feel, hey, I'm just a small individual, I'm the one person shop, it's not to say it's impossible. I agree, it's harder now, but keep all those things in mind. And Wes, I think your question here was, if you get to the checkbox portion of your work here, and folks are kind of doing whatever assessments or audit, are you following those frameworks and strategies and whatever standards we've got out and about? That's what we should kind of be striving towards and use those. But it's a matter of knowing that they are out there and then implementing them the best you can. So.
Okay, well said. Really well said. So maybe one more thing I wanted to come back to here before we move on. I think we all agree we love the mantra of smaller orgs do need help. They do bear too great of a burden. But when it says we must ask more of the most capable and best positioned actors to make our digital ecosystem secure and resilient, I think it's fair to say there's examples of this. Take, for example, Microsoft making some changes with some of the Exchange stuff that was happening, just literally went and I guess CISA or whoever went and patched it. Or to use Microsoft again, forcing and changing the default standards and not allowing macros in anymore. So, like, there's examples of top of market changes, but I don't know, maybe just an open question for both of you. Like, how do you take that mantra of big orgs need to do more and help those that are less able, and actually take that into wider practice? It's a tough one, isn't it?
I'm noodling.
I might go out on a limb here, and maybe hopefully not too far out on a limb. But I think we're all running a business. So if you've got a big org, if you're, hey, whatever enterprise organization, and you're asked to come down from the heavens to help the little folks, right? Like, at the end of the day, money is a motivator, whether or not you're a threat actor dropping ransomware or mining cryptocurrency to make a quick buck, or you're a business in the marketplace. I think maybe this is too out there or philosophical, but if we kind of just table that for a little bit, if we say, look, okay, we don't need to make this a cash grab with everything that we put our attention to. Let's build up the community. Let's know and acknowledge, especially with this strategy as part of the backdrop here, we kind of need to get in this thing together. And I think that'll maybe even continue to ride a new theme and trend that we'll see later within the strategy. If we have to have that information sharing, we have to be part of the party as a village, everyone playing in concert. I don't know if that gets exactly to the root of your question there, Wes, but maybe that's a flag I'll put in the ground for now.
I have a different approach to it. I think capitalism, as a result, and our legal system, especially in the U.S., typically have some corrective forces here. And what I'm getting at is, let's say you take a company like, let's say, Microsoft, and their job is to enable MFA by default for all users as a requirement that you must then go turn off. That creates friction in which there's business loss, to John's point. They're not necessarily into that point of the business loss aspect. I think you're going to see, like Philip Morris with Fred Levin, you're going to see watermark or watershed cases that maybe watermark, but just kidding, watershed cases that will exist in the civil space around insecure by default. And I think some of the language we see later in this will come into play as precedent in some of these cases. And I think somebody's going to be out there and say, there's enough death tied to this one case. I can now make a civil class action suit that these companies gave me a car that didn't have seatbelts because it was an option, or they sold me a Boeing plane that didn't have a second validation of its vertical attitude sensor, let's just say, and bring it back to the MAX 8. You will start seeing those decisions, I believe, be understood enough to articulate in court and drive change through that punitive nature, because that's usually how big businesses respond. It's not necessarily in this benevolence aspect, unfortunately. So
But
my opinion.
I think I share it. The thing I would say though is there's got to be a driver to that. And that's one thing Brad brought up as well that I happen to agree with, is like, we haven't yet seen the systemic driver. We haven't seen the equivalent of a class 4 hurricane smack a bunch of roofs in Florida to cause major changes in the insurance market on homeowners insurance. We haven't seen the cyber equivalent. As bad as the Kaseya attack was, as bad as the SolarWinds attack, it was a tiny, when you look at the damages, a tiny amount. So when they go back to 6 billion in damages, what they're saying is, well, 6 million in the aggregate, which it doesn't mean a lot. It's almost like a whole bunch of little mini tornadoes that are taking out a house in this town in Kansas and this town in like Washington. It's not enough to really move the needle. And unfortunately, I think that's part of what we need is, and I don't want it, but that's what it's going to take, is some major systemic thing that just causes us to rethink all of this.
But the seeds are laid on some of these conversations. And I think that's the important part I want to tackle.
Yep. So let's jump into those 5 pillars. There's some really great stuff that I do think exists here. And I see some of the comments. We're going to get into some of this. Even Darren's comment, right?
Yeah,
of
Darren's
like,
good.
we want to tackle that one real quick and just kind of give some thoughts on this. Darren's coming in, especially from looks like his, federal days of putting that hat on. It's a strategy document, doesn't have tactical information and like, here's what we're going to do and what we're going to set. So is this just political maneuvering? And, once the new election cycle comes in, is it forgotten? What are your thoughts on that?
To stay away from the political aspect of this, I would say, I agree with Darren in the sense that this is a strategic document. There isn't a lot of direct tactical stuff that's coming out of it directly. It could lose steam just as everything has, right? Look, even in the MSP world, we had Trustmark in 08 and 14, and here we are even just now talking about it and shocked by it today. So I agree, but I guess, Darren, I just lean into the motion of it having to happen. And the fact that we are seeing this and it's being codified in ways that I haven't seen before, and it builds upon the other codifications of the prior EOs, both from Biden and Trump's administration. We started seeing the smoke of us being talked about, what we are screaming about to people every day. And Darren, I know where you come from too. And it's being talked about. So I agree. I don't see it pessimistically, though. I think it's positive.
John?
I understand and share a certain amount of the sentiment from Darren, especially it is a strategy document, as we've all just mentioned. But at the point where he mentions, hey, listen, this is a great talking point for folks in the field, and the people that need to hear or see this just aren't going to. They're not going to dig through it. If anything, I take that as a certain amount of onus and thing for us to go be. Shepherd is not the right word by any means.
I say cheerleader. That's me.
Champion. I don't know.
Pom-poms, whatever you want to use.
As you mentioned, Matt, like, look, we've been screaming and shouting about this. We still have to. And that hasn't gone away. That doesn't go away until we can see some more of those tactical maneuvers. Look, the fact that it's a strategy document, someone said it. And coming from the big top Whitehouse dogs, we have to echo that the best that we can.
Yeah, it's well said. And I will say this. I've gone through those motions too, like, especially like when executive orders come out around cybersecurity, like, oh, here we go, just dictating from the White House, whatever. But you know what? I can point to a number of these executive orders that have had major changes. You take President Obama's 2013 executive order around critical infrastructure, and that literally plays in not just to this, but it plays into what ISACs have done. It plays into like there's a lot of good that came out of a single executive order. So yeah, I guess my view is like, if this just forces one iterative next step change that makes things a little bit better, I'm happy. I'll celebrate. Is it going to be perfect? No, probably not. And that's just the nature of this world. So great question and really good thoughts. Okay, so let's jump into these 5 pillars. Pillar 1 is defending critical infrastructure. Oh boy, there's a lot that's in all of this, right? I'll just read that first little statement. While voluntary approaches to critical infrastructure cybersecurity have produced meaningful improvements, I think we would agree with that, lack of mandatory requirements has resulted in inadequate and inconsistent outcomes. Oh boy. What do they mean? What do you think? Is there some like, is there, they mentioned Congress, closing gaps where statutory authority lacks. We know that CISA is not a regulating body.
Right.
So where it lacks, they say we'd like to work with Congress to address it around critical infrastructure. Let's just open this up, and I don't even know who to go to first. Whoever just wants to be the boldest and bravest here among you two. What do you think about this whole mandatory requirement thing? My goodness,
John, you, John.
Yeah, no. My turn to put my finger on my nose. It's all you, Matt.
Yeah. Okay, fine. I think this is true. I mean, if, not to pull Jacob Horn's chain on this one, right? But 800-171, 2016, all the way up till 2023, I've still had executives go, Matt, how long can I lie about this whole CMMC 800-171 thing, right? And so there's been very little that can be done about that for critical infrastructure, any of our QE or controlled unclassified information, any of that space. And I think if you look at the work that Dragos has done, I mean, they've grown massively. They've been working with critical infrastructure. They're doing a fantastic job in that work. But to the point, there's no teeth. Right. And so much so that they're using an 1860s law from the Federal Trade Commission for the False Claims Act to sue one of the first parts manufacturers with Rocket Jet Aerodyne or Aerojet Rocketdyne. I can't remember. I'm terrible at that. But last year, right, under an act that says, hey, don't sell us, bad milk, right? And after the Civil War. I mean, so, it's kind of interesting to see the way they've had to maneuver, which also goes back to what some people have said of use existing laws, modify existing laws, like maybe the Consumer Safety Act, right? Things like that could be moved towards some of this. But I do believe that voluntary approaches don't work. Capitalism is what capitalism is. We're going to move forward and make the profit first. And I think that Congress does need to give some teeth around some of these things, but I don't think we can solve this in this conversation. In my point on the tactical aspect of it, it's a lot. But yeah, that's my points on it. John,
well, Wes, I don't know if you mind scrolling down a little bit on your screenshot here or the website you've got pulled up to list some of those critical infrastructures, because this is often a question that I just like to kind of pose because I surprisingly get different answers to it, and I'm curious for folks, hey, you gentlemen with me, and maybe even the audience, I have a hunch in what direction this might lean, but are managed service providers
right there,
critical
Wes.
infrastructure? Yeah. So yes, under information technology sector, if that's the understanding we want to go for, are MSPs critical infrastructure? And I think pouring down into even all those other, like between your clients, your customers, the folks, businesses and organizations that you support, probably each of those have their hands in those different critical infrastructures. In which case, cool, we're part of the cool kids club, but what are those improvements? What are those benefits and now work that we're going to see done with it?
Yeah. But we already have a law on this, right? If you guys go back to last March, they passed CERCIA as part of the omnibus bill, right? It's still in the works, it's still being worked out, but it very much defined MSPs. It very much said managed service providers, at least around reporting requirements, the ability to report on critical infrastructure and attacks there. And that goes back to their very beginning of this premise of the stage that people aren't sharing data. They aren't getting all of this information, and that's the whole reason for CERCIA. But if you carry that forward, also during the pandemic, I guess us and liquor stores are considered, necessary infrastructure. But seriously, though, we were allowed to go and work because we are a force multiplier at the very least, right? In the sense that we serve many, which makes an SMB feel like an enterprise. Right. If you go look at some of these, go ahead, Wes. But if you look at some of the MSPs, they are the size of an enterprise of what they support underneath them. Anyways, go ahead.
My issue with the whole IT sector being, a critical infrastructure is it's so vague, right? Like
It is.
it's up for it really is up for debate. And I'll even steal a page out of John Strand's book. John, if he were here, he'd say, "Wait, why are we even talking about critical infrastructure? Why should we designate some industries as critical and others as not?"
They're
It's
all
like everything's
interdependent.
critical.
Everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's his point. Is like he doesn't even like to put words in his mouth. At least the last time I talked to him about this, he doesn't even like the idea. Maybe he's changed, right? But he doesn't even like the idea of like that designation. But the reality is, when you have an industry designated as critical infrastructure, then there's a lot of things that go with it. You do have the ability to have ISAC spun up to serve that industry. In some cases, you do have regulatory bodies, and actually most of them, we go back and we take a peek at all of these. The whole list is right here on the left. Pretty much all of these do have a regulatory body. Now, they're all of
Yep.
different levels of maturity. Some are much more focused on like health safety. Some are focused on physical safety, like energy and dam sector. Some actually do a much better job around like cybersecurity, like financial services.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, the reality is, I think what we would all agree with is when we say critical infrastructure at this point, I think we would all agree we haven't really done a really good job of unifying all of this. There are gaps that exist in the regulatory landscape. There is inconsistency from one regulating body to the next. And so if we were to like sort of map that journey out, like we are very fragmented right now. And so, I think that goes into like one thing we could focus on that if I'm in charge and I'm the dictator is I'd say, can we at least unify a standard cybersecurity minimum, the poverty line that has to be set for all critical infrastructure? Could we at least start there? Like, it's not perfect, but it's at least a start. What do you think?
Yeah. You also get into licensures, right? And in that statement. And if you look at the financial sector, why are they so far ahead? I believe, and I put forth that it comes into the point that they have an SRO. They are an SRO through FINRA and through other SRO capabilities in the banking space, not as much. But when you look at that as a financial entity, I have to be a broker dealer if I'm going to hang somebody's license to be a broker. And if I want to be a broker without a BD, I have to be an RIA. And so it comes to this concept of if we just said, oh, we're going to license and regulate all of MSP and all of technology providers, what about my internal guy or gal? How do they play into that factor? And that's where I think FINRA kind of has this solved, where if I hold that license and I'm going to do that work and I might work for a company, I still have ethical things I had to stand by, and I had to turn that company in if they wanted to violate those ethics, right? And you got into that world of the ability to create control. And as a result, broker dealers and RIAs do a really good job. I mean, somebody throw rocks at me if they want to, do a really good job of being early. The first time I ever saw an MDM was a broker dealer. The first time I ever, right? So they have been on that front end of the adoption curve, and they are managing tons of small brokers that work in a one-person office or three-person RIA, or right. And so you get into that understanding of I like regulation. I just think it has to be SRO'd, and I think it has to be us making. There's what is that poverty line, in my opinion, not Congress or some regulatory body in that way.
Yep. Actually kicked you off the stream for a second. Sorry about that.
You know what happens? It's okay. I get ejected once a week, so.
I hit the wrong button. I'm like, dang it, bring it back on. Let's see. So, John, any other thoughts here? There's a lot packed in. We talked about regulation, congressional stuff. Maybe we haven't talked about that third piece on Pillar 1 around cloud and IT service providers, and sort of well, we did talk about this earlier, but anything else that stands out to you here that you want to mention?
Again, nothing novel. Agreeing and accepting, like, okay, the cloud hosting providers, the cloud infrastructure, that is seemingly just the place to be right now, for better or for worse. Hey, managing your business or having just things out in the cloud in some cheesy buzzword. It needs to have the spotlight shined on it, because it expands the one-to-many effect for supply chain issues, vulnerabilities, exploits, whatever, mayhem, you name it, tenfold. Because there's so many different roads to go down here with, it's just not your computer, it's someone else's computer. You're extending your trust. I don't know, whatever zero trust pot shots might be here and there. Look, Kyle Hansloven, our CEO, one of the other fellows over at Huntress, he calls himself the chief janitor. He has one really sharp thing that I think I love to tout and just echo, if I may. And that, hey, for a long time, we always talked about how we're going to protect our network and our castle walls that we build, whether we're in the office or whatever. We have the moat surrounding it, their security, yada, yada, yada. All about the network perimeter. our firewall, our DNS, our email stuff. But there is no network perimeter anymore. The perimeter's dead.
Well, and Phyllis Lee says, right, to quote Phyllis, she's coming on my show later today, your network ends where your users' fingertips land, right? And that's now Starbucks, and that's now everywhere, and using cloud resources from different disparate places. But I will say, for this cloud and IT service providers, number 3 probably has the greatest impact over trying to get regulations and Congress to close gaps in authority. And I think that if we looked at Microsoft to say, you can't profit from Azure abuse, and you're going to have to shut this down and you have to own it. And you start driving those cloud providers to make it secure by default. I know I'm on a single string guitar right now, y'all, but I feel like that's the biggest movement. If I was that dictator and trying to drive this, it would be very, very frank sit downs of how this world needs to continue to change for you as a force multiplier, as a mass aggregator, as a mass space for death. Need to make sure you're proving you're doing the right things to continue to harden that organization, both from a technical capability, threat research, threat advancement, which Microsoft's done a great job of. I'm not beating them up. But how you need to look at that as a force multiplier, because that's what's going to change a lot of the other things below it faster than teaching the masses, which I still think has to happen.
All right. So let's move to pillar 2. Pillar 2 is an interesting one. Maybe a little bit more of our happy place is, disrupting and dismantling threat actors. And we've seen this happen, right? They kind of draw the connections between kinetic and cyber warfare. We've talked about a little bit before on other live streams about, taking pages out of what's happening in the conflict in Ukraine and what that looks like. And, that strategy, I think to me, if I had to pick one of the 3 that really I'm the most interested in is number 2. And again, we've seen examples of this, Microsoft pointing them out once again, working alongside federal government. You also see some of the larger security firms that are out there that work alongside the federal government. CrowdStrike's been known a time or two, but heck, Huntress, John, I've seen Huntress in the national news cycles many times, and I love that, right? Like those are great things here. So I think we're starting to see more maturity around this. We saw the Hive ransomware group just shut down a few months ago. So we know that the federal government is, and international cooperation as a whole is capable of takedowns. We know that they have but it takes time. It's high effort. Typically you have to wait until there's enough, they either make a mistake or there's enough, international threat. You look at even the takedown and really the arrest of our evil, all out of Russia. That a lot of that came from a lot of the pressure, political maneuvering happening. So it's great to say that, and we always applaud takedowns. But I don't know that we're going to see like a significant. I don't think this report is going to like change, the nature and scale of these things, right? So what else stands out to you from the disrupt and dismantle, John? I'm going to go to you first.
Okay, thank you. Because again, as you mentioned, hey, this is sort of our happy place because it's a little bit more nerdy, a little bit more, hey, on the keyboard technical. Because in my mind, when I read through this, and I think they even mention it explicitly, they use the words in the cyber strategy of defend forward and defending forward. And it's like a weird sort of, okay, leaning in, not adversarial is not the right word because it's defense, but knowing how our threat actors or adversaries are trying to bang on the door and what we could put in place for some of those countermeasures, whether it's a takedown, whether it's, hey, go and seize and stop operations, which the strategy calls out even Emotet some time ago, and just the others that you mentioned. But it's an interesting thing for me to balance and even I suppose us, right? Hey, Huntress, there's kind of a fun, cool story that we've maybe kept it within some circles because we've started to and are starting to try to put some more preventive measures in place so that certain malware families will just be inoculated or they're defeated or they'll drop dead and they won't actually detonate. That's something that we're like really cool, fascinated by and wanting to do more of, but I'm totally cognizant that that's a certain amount of whack-a-mole. Like, hey, we're not stopping the root problem. We're just making sure the symptoms don't kick in, right? And with that, I think a lot of the modern threats that we see, hey, if you want to pull up Uber or whatever recent incident, you get to a point where today's threats don't use malware. And that's kind of a hard one that, again, leans into our whack-a-mole. It's about, hey, can I compromise a person's identity and gain the same access that they might have? So whether we're stopping a botnet or whether we're taking down crypto miners, et cetera, those aren't all of the pieces of the puzzle. So I'm still noodling on it and thinking on it, but Matt, I'll kick it to you if I may.
Yeah, I want to focus in on number two and number one. So most people don't know this, but in my former life, we acquired an MSP. That MSP was ransomed by our evil. It was the third time. They had been a piggy bank, so to speak, for a few years. That said, when we shared that information with the federal government in June of 2021, and they sat down in our office in Texas, the FBI never circled back. They never did anything back to us. We never got any data the other direction. It was a one-way partnership. And I think, not to pull Darren's chain on this, but I never felt like there was anything coming back to me about thank you or great. Now, if you fast forward that, they were part of the affidavit that resulted in their arrest. But if you look at modern stuff like Cyclops Blink with WatchGuard, they weren't allowed to talk about it for months because the feds were involved. Not one person in the feds can give some actual relief of pressure from that perspective. Same thing with LastPass. I think there's still some information that hasn't come in from that perspective, where the public-private partnership means stepping on a company and watching their shares destroyed, even though they are involved in trying to do the right thing. And maybe I'm speaking out of turn on this from my lens of those two events, but yeah, I think it has to change drastically. Darren, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat about it, being from that side of the house, but I don't feel like it's a two-way street today.
All right, so we've got about 8 minutes left. Let's jump into pillar three is the last we're covering. So please don't panic. We're not going to we'd love to get into 4 and 5, but one through 3 is where we just had the time to focus on today. So pillar three moves into shaping market forces to drive security and resilience. We love the word resilience. Ryan Weeks was one of the first to really kind of not pioneer, but really bring the term and its capabilities,
Yeah.
scream it into the channel. I think it's been so helpful for all of us to sort of shift and understand a little bit more of what that means, right? But we've talked about a little bit this already. That first piece right there will shift the consequences of poor cybersecurity away from the most vulnerable, making our digital ecosystem more worthy of trust. I mean, that even smacks of the health system, right? Like, how do we protect the immune compromised and those that are vulnerable, right? What is the responsibility of the rest of us? What should the herd be doing as a whole? Again, I think most of us would applaud the mentality. I think the devil's in the details. What exactly do we do differently to get there, and how does that work? We must hold the stewards of our data accountable for the protection of personal data. Again, we agree with that, but this comes back into, what does that look like? When are we going to see the very first lawsuit brought up around liability? So there's a lot that's here. John, I guess I'll go to you first. Pillar three, this first piece of it. Anything in particular stand out to you?
I'm going to drive down a road here, and if anyone's willing to course correct me, please do. I don't know if I'm driving down the right road, but when I get into the conversation of, hey, we must hold the stewards of our data accountable, it's a lot of that transparency and being willing to go out and offer the information and share. I'll harken back to Log4j days when, hey, it felt like the internet was on fire because, hey, I don't know if this vendor, I don't know if this product, I don't know if this provider that I'm using is vulnerable, because they don't know.
Right.
And it might take weeks, months for them to actually come out of the woodwork and say, yeah, sorry, we're kind of popped too. And then we'll go in the frenzy and patch. I don't know if that's going to be talking about the markets. I don't know if that gets into the weird software bill of materials conversation that I know is a polarizing topic, but I do think that those are the breadcrumbs or the puzzle pieces that we have to play with. What say you? Have I driven down the wrong road there?
No, man, I'll be your co-pilot on this one. I think transparency and humility being driven from both our own cultural acceptance of this giant problem that we all have to solve together, right? But also, when you start thinking about it, this makes me very happy at being better sheepdogs. But this makes me very happy, right? Because capitalism does correct. Right at the beginning, if you go back to the corollary of a car and needing seatbelts and safety testing and making sure that the engine crumple zone goes underneath the car and not through the passengers, when that was first proposed, this is going to destroy the auto industry. We're never going to be able to deal with this kind of cost. This is never going to work. Right. And that played out for 20 years where there was lobbying both directions and you saw that fight going on. But ultimately, the forces did shape it. And ultimately now every car you get in pretty much has about the same safety rating, or at least enough that I can hit somebody at 60 and probably not die if I'm wearing my seatbelt, right? And so I think those are the kind of things we're talking about, is that those forces are going to continue to shape it. And we're already seeing it. DOJ was very crafty in the wielding of the False Claims Act. There's even speculation that extends into Medicare and in any other dollars and contracts of the federal government. So I think the forces tend to correct. I think if we're looking at what this would mean, is we have to start giving protections for the consumer safety side of this in the same way we did cars and other things. But those are my initial thoughts on this. Shaping the market forces is probably going to be the longer term, more effective strategic play.
Yep, well said. So moving forward a little bit more, a couple other things the Pillar talks about that I thought was pretty interesting is, talking about vendors, ignoring best practices for secure development, configuration, shipping stuff out that they shouldn't, knowing vulnerabilities exist, integrating third-party software unvetted. These are things that I think we do agree. We're like, yes, congrats. Thank you, federal government, for like pointing this out. And I think most of us would support this, some amount of, again, going back to liability, if we could prove that you ignored some of those things, or even going a little bit further right after the red, they leverage their position. We've seen this in the channel before, to disclaim liability by contract, further reducing their incentive to follow up, right? These are big things that we see. It's not just the channel. I'm not just only picking
this
on
is
the
everywhere.
MSP space.
This isn't just the channel.
This is everywhere. That's exactly right. It's everywhere. But I think we all say, this is good stuff. We're glad to see some of these things. Now, of
100%.
course, these just words. We need to see how this could come into like Congress passing some legislation. But I think we'd all appreciate and encourage this, right?
Yep. I don't know how it happens, but yes, I would say that is a big challenge today. If you just take this down into what me and Weeks had as a conversation was, you've got market forces saying, I'm signing this giant contract if you'll add this one feature to your platform. How the hell does that compete with, hey, this one security researcher named John Hammond found this real weird race condition he can do that's really bad for us? Like, let's put that in next sprint. Which one wins? Which one wins? Capitalism makes the first one win, not the second. So that's the challenge that has to be fixed if I were to sum it up.
Hey, I know we have just a couple moments left. So if I may, I'd love to ask even, hey, audience, hey, folks, listen in, tune in, checking to see what us three dudes happen to have to say. I honestly just tend to fall back on, like, I know it's a strategy document and I know we're not seeing the tactical stuff yet, but man, it's early. Like, this thing dropped yesterday. So can I ask that question? I'd love to see folks chiming in the chat if you're willing to. What the heck do you think? Is it right in some regards? Is it wrong in some regards? Is there something that needs more attention? Did it not give enough justice? Did we not give enough justice to one portion of component? What do you think? Not just us three dudes up on the screen.
I almost brought my glasses so I could feel more included.
So I can fit in, right? Yeah. I almost shaved my head.
Like the out guy. Whatever. Yeah. Is the strategy broken? I think that's the question. Is this, as a guide stone, a good strategy for our nation around cyber? I think that's what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what everyone else says as well. Andrew Kaiser, good to see you on. Elizabeth Perry, you guys rock. Yep. Got Dom checking in. Long overdue. Yep. My good friend Jim, rather trust the market over the government. Yeah. And, that may be the way. We were talking with Brad yesterday about what CompTIA is doing around Trustmark and, what that could look like as the very beginning iterations of, what does that look like to have this public-private partnership? And it's a long way in coming. You can't just dictate that. We need state governments to get involved, et cetera, et
Mike
cetera.
Burghardt says you can't ask that with 2 minutes left.
Yeah. You didn't have it already typed out? You didn't have it ready to copy paste?
Gosh, we thought you were already ready, man.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, really good conversations. And let's continue the conversations. Let's keep these things going.
Yeah. And the best thing I could ask you is go be that creator, y'all. Add your own thoughts, spread the word. Matt Topper and I had a great conversation about that, but go out there and add your thoughts and teach. We can't just be us three yahoos up here screaming all the time. So
agree. Completely agree. All right. Well, maybe final comments for each of us. John, take us away.
Look, thumbs up. Hard to know what's going on the horizon, but I think a step in any direction is better than no movement at all. But hey, thank you for letting me ride your coattails for a little bit, Matt and Wes. This is
whatever.
Don't know about that. It's probably the only lie you've said all day, my friend.
Yeah, it's okay though. We still love you. Mine would just be ditto, the shortest and most succinct exit I can give. So ditto.
Right on. Yeah, and I will say nothing additional as well, other than here are the fine folks that were involved today. So Matt Lee, thank you so very much for joining. John Hammond is always my friend. You just make the world a better place as well. Thank you to both of you. Let's continue the conversation. Hope you guys enjoyed this. And until next time, we will talk to you fine folks later. Thank you guys so very much.
Check out Empath Cyber.
Like, comment, subscribe.